Welcome back. In this video, we're going to set up our explosion. So we're going to make our fruits sliced and make them explode. Therefore, let's go ahead and create a new project. We're going to use the 3D template here. I'm going to call this one Fruit Ninja. All right, and once Unity is loaded, I would like you to download the file that is assigned to this lecture. So just download the models folder. So the file will contain this folder here, the models folder. You'll find two files. One is going to contain the project at the end stage of this lecture, and the other one is just going to contain the models. So I would recommend that you just download the models folder or the zip file and unzip it, and then drag the models folder into your game, into the assets folder that you have. And then inside of the assets folder, let's check it out. So what we have inside of models is going to be the materials. So these will be the different colors that we're using for our bananas, for example, for the watermelon and so forth, as well as the bomb. So it's just colors basically. So materials that we're going to use. And then inside of the FBX folder, we have the actual 3D models. This file format FBX stands for Filmbox and is a proprietary file format developed by Kadara and owned by Autodesk since 2006. So it's just a 3D model data type. That's why we have this FBX folder. So if you're using Blender, if you're creating 3D models using Blender and you export them, you can export them as FBX files and then you can use them in Unity very easily. That's what we have done here. So you will see that we have all of these files here. Now, for example, this banana, you can see it uses a certain material. So this here is the material, and then it has a certain mesh. So basically the shape as well as the color that will be put on top of the shape. So let's look at this. The 3D viewer pops up here in my case, and you can see that this is the banana, which is in the end really just a bunch of flat surfaces which are ordered in a certain way, using certain angles and so forth, and then they create this effect of looking like a banana, more or less. Okay, so low poly banana, very few polygons, but it's exactly the kind of style that I wanted for this game. Okay, so now we have that for the different game objects that we're going to use in our game. So for example, this banana cut, you can see it's basically the same thing, only that this kind of banana is now cut into pieces. And it has different colors, so the interior colors as well, because if you look at it, it has this interior brownish color and then the darker brown surrounding it. So here we are using multiple different colors, so 3 colors in total, and we have 2 mesh files. So now let's go ahead and use some of those. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go close to the main camera and then see where it will point to. It's going to point over there. So let's drag the banana in here. So now we have our banana in the game. Let's look at the game. It's over here. So maybe I want to put it a little closer. Let's just position it at 0, 0, 0. Let's reset it and see. Well, it will be in the center of our game. So that's fine. Now you could, of course, scale it up. So use something like twice the size, like this, if you like it to be a little bigger. So you see I'm also using QHD here as the settings. You can use 4K, but then you have to make sure that you adjust your game accordingly. So now we have the banana, and I'm going to drag in the cut banana into my scene as well. And I'm going to also reset the position and then drag it a little bit to the side so that it's going to be next to my other banana. Okay, so I'm going to set the scale to 2 as well so we can see it a little better. So now we have these 2 bananas, and what I would like to do is I would like to make this banana here explode. So once this one is exploding, basically it will be replaced with this one. So here, once I cut through it, it will get rid of this object and we'll replace it with this object. And then what it should do is it should push away the 2 sides of the banana. So it will push away this side to the left and the right side to the right. Because if you look at your banana, you will see that it has a left side. Let's look at the scene, and the right side. And by the way, it looks like they are the other way around based on the direction that we're looking at. So what we can do is we can rotate the Y coordinate by 180 degrees, and now left will actually be left and right will actually be right. Okay, so if you rotate the entire banana cut. So now what we need to do is also to rotate the main banana at the same time. Otherwise it would look a little weird, and not the Z coordinate, but actually the Y coordinate. Okay, so if we slice through this banana, it will create this banana. This one will disappear. And then what I want is a little bit of force, which will push away this banana piece and this banana piece to the opposite directions, and will give them a little bit of rotation at the same time. This is, by the way, a very common practice in game development. You don't have to create everything super precisely. We don't have to exactly calculate where the cut went through and use physics here and make it super complicated. Sometimes neat little tricks like this one are going to do the trick, and you don't have to go anywhere else. So you don't have to make it any more complicated than that, which is really amazing. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add physics to our bananas. So first of all, my banana, I'm going to give it a collider. And because it is similar to a box, so if you look at it from this perspective, it's more or less like a box. I will give it a box collider. But I'm going to give it a 2D collider, because it's going to be a little tricky. So on one hand, this one will be using a 2D collider and 2D physics, and this other object, so the one that is going to be sliced, will use 3D objects. Because we don't need this to be a 3D object, it will be in a 2D game anyways, okay? But this one needs to be 3D because we want it to go or be pushed towards different angles and different directions in the 3D world. So let's go ahead and just give this banana here a box collider 2D. And then on top of that, let's give it a rigid body 2D, because as I said, it will be a 2D object. So I want it to be influenced by physics. It should be falling down. And now let's make sure that we are creating new prefabs out of those. So prefabs, and I'm going to use this banana and drag it into my prefabs folder. So this will be the prefab variant that I'm going to drag in there. Okay, because if we look at it, this model, it is considered as a prefab as well, even though I didn't assign that specifically. Well, but now you see our banana is going to be a prefab. And something similar is what I want to have for my banana cut. So for the cut banana. But here, I'm not going to add the physics to my cut banana. I'm going to add the physics to the left and the right hand side. So I will mark both of them. And I will now add a 3D rigid body as well as a 3D box collider for them. So like this. So now you can see this is how the banana is going to be from a collider point of view. And it will now have a rigid body for both of them. So separately, this banana has a rigid body and this banana also has a rigid body. So now let's drag this banana cut also into our prefabs folder and drag the prefab variant in there. So now let's get rid of those two here. And once we deleted those, let's also change the names of them. So this one will be called banana, not banana variant. And this one will be banana cut, not banana cut variant. Okay, so let's drag them in here. Let's set the position to 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to move it a little to the side. And then let's cut or drag the cut banana in there as well. Let's position it to 0, 0, 0 as well and move it a little to the side. Let's look at our game. Okay, so now we have those two bananas. If we run the game, we will see that those two bananas will be dragged to the ground because they have physics, right? So gravity is dragging them down because they have a rigid body assigned to them. So now let's give our banana a script. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new folder here. I'm going to call this one scripts. And then inside of this folder, let's go ahead and create a C# script, which I'm going to call fruit. So it will just take care of the fruit. It will instantiate the fruit, slice it, and stuff like that. So the first thing that I will need to know for a fruit is what is going to be the game object that should replace it. Because if we look at it, I want this fruit to be replaced by that right fruit. Okay, so for this to happen, we need to know the game object that we want to create. So I'm going to say public game object sliced fruit prefab. All right, and now I'm going to require a method that should create that sliced prefab. So should create the sliced fruit. So I'm going to create this method, public void create sliced fruit, So I'm going to call this method. So this void method, what it should do is it should destroy the fruit itself. So here, destroy game object. So what that will do is it will destroy the fruit itself. So it will destroy this fruit because that's what we want, right? But before we destroy it, we want this fruit to appear instead. So we need to instantiate it. So let's create a game object, inst, which stands for instance. And then I'm going to instantiate it using the instantiate method, which really just creates a new game object at a given position. So what is it that I want to create? I want to create the sliced fruit prefab. And where do I want to create that fruit? Well, I want to create it at the same position as our current position is. And then I want to give it the same rotation even as the current rotation is. And that's what it will achieve for us. So it will be created, it will be instantiated at the position of our current item, so transform that is attached to this object, so the object that holds this script, which is our fruit, as well as the rotation of the fruit itself. Okay, so now that we have that, let's actually test this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say in the event that we press the space key, the create sliced fruit method should be called. Okay, so please go ahead and implement that code because you know how to get the key code by this point and get the input of the user. So once we press the space key, I want this to happen. Okay, I hope you tried it. So input dot get key down. And then which key do we want to use here? Well, we're going to use the key code dot space key. So if the space key is pressed, I want to call this create sliced fruit method. Okay, call this one here, which will create a game object and will destroy the current game object. Okay, so let's save this script. Let's go back to Unity and let's make sure that we assign it to our banana. All right, so here, let's add the component. Well, we can drag it in here. That's fine as well. So now we have this fruit script and it needs to know which sliced fruit it should use. But it says prefab, right? So let's make sure that we actually assign a prefab to it and not from the scene itself. So really important. So the banana should use the sliced fruit prefab from the prefabs folder, banana cut. Okay, so at this point we can get rid of this banana cut here. We just have the banana in our game. Okay, and the banana has the script assigned to it. Let's also, by the way, overwrite or apply the changes to our prefab, to the banana prefab, apply all. And now let's run the game. So you saw that real quick, maybe. Let me change the position of the banana a little bit. So let me pull it up just a tiny bit like so. It will be at the top here. Let's run it again and press the space key really quickly. And bam, you see the banana was split into two pieces. So that's not really interesting, I'd say. That's actually quite boring. So how can we make this a little cooler? Well, we can do so by adding an explosion to it. Okay, so let's add an explosion to the code. And where would we do that? Well, I'd say once we created the object. So what I want to do here is, on one hand, I want to change the rotation of the two sliced fruit prefab children. And at the same time, I want to add an explosion in the middle of them so that both of them are going to be pushed away from each other. So how can we do that? Well, that's a very cool thing here. So on one hand, we need to get the components, rigid bodies of our instantiated prefab. So getting the component rigid body from the prefab itself wouldn't help us, because let's look at our game real quick. So here, our banana cut here, this one, you can see that the banana cut, which is the one replacing, so this is the prefab that replaces the uncut banana. But the banana cut doesn't have a rigid body. The banana cut will not be influenced by physics, but its left side has a rigid body and the right side has a rigid body. We need to affect the rotation of this banana as well as this banana, and we need to push them away from each other. So we need to use their rigid bodies for them to be influenced. So how can we get access to the children, and not even one, but multiple children of a game object? Well, let's look at that. So therefore, what we can just do is we can just use an array of rigid bodies. So here I'm just going to say RB on sliced. So this will be the rigid body on sliced game object. And I'm going to say use the instantiated game object, so the instance of the game object, and get its transform. And then you can call its get component in children. So get its component in children. We actually want to get its components in children. So not just one, but multiple ones. So you can see here, there are different kinds of methods, and this is the one that we're using here. This get components in children. So with the S here. And we want to get the rigid body from it. Like so. This will give us the rigid body components from our objects that are inside of this inst game object. And it has two, so this will be an array of 2 rigid bodies. Okay, so array of rigid bodies. We have used arrays before, but you can use arrays not just of simple data types, but also of rigid bodies. And now what we can use is something called a for each loop. So you can enter for each and then press tab twice, and then this will create this code for you. Then you have to define the data type of the object in the collection to iterate through, the name, the identifier that you want to give each individual item in the collection that you want to run through. Okay, so this is like a for loop that we have seen, but it's really good to iterate through collections. So what is a collection? Well, an array, for example, is a collection. So what is the collection that we want to go through? Well, it's this rigid body on sliced, which is an array and is a collection. So we go through this collection, and now let's give every single individual item a name. Well, we could call it R for rigid body, or we could call it rigid body for rigid body. And then what kind of data type will it be? Well, we could just use var, but we can also just say, okay, it will be a rigid body, because an array of rigid bodies consists of rigid bodies, right? So it is a set of multiple rigid bodies. So we're saying, okay, every single individual rigid body inside of this list of rigid bodies, do something with it. And now we can say what we want to do with it. So what I want to do with it is I want to say transform rotation should be a random rotation. So what I'm just doing here is I'm just saying, okay, give this rigid body that will be the one of the child that we're currently looking at, give this a random rotation, because this random class has also this method rotation, which will return a quaternion, which is a rotation. So we'll just say, okay, I'm going to give you a random rotation on the X, Y, and Z coordinates. And that's what this method will do for us. And then what I would like to do is I would like to add some explosion force. So rigid body dot add explosion force, like so. There is this cool little method inside of rigid body. So inside of this class rigid body, there is this method called add explosion force, which applies a force to rigid body that simulates an explosion effect. Okay, that's really cool. That's exactly what I want. So now it needs to know the explosion force. So how strong should the explosion be? Then it needs to know from which position this explosion should go. And then it needs to know the, well, in this case, the explosion radius, the upwards modifier, and so forth. Well, that's one overload. There are multiple overloads. Let's just use one here. Random range. So I will just say, okay, I want to have an explosion between 500 and 1000. And the explosion position, so the center, epicentrum, so to speak, of the explosion should be the position of the fruit. And then I will define the explosion radius. I'm just going to set that to 5, for example. Now 5 would be an option. Maybe it would be even better if we actually create a variable here up top. So you can make it public or you can make it serializable private, however you want. And I'm going to call it public float explosion radius. So what that will do is it will give the explosion a certain radius. I'm going to set that to, for example, 5. Okay, so this float now is what I want to use down here instead of this 5f, so that I can now change it in Unity. I'm going to make it public. You could, of course, also use serializable and private here. So this will now give it an explosion. Let's actually check it out. So make sure that you save your script, by the way. So here, once you have saved it, go over to your scene. Let's make this thing explode. And boom, you can see it explodes in different directions. So that's what our explosion does for us. Boom, our banana flies towards all directions. A little random direction for all of them with a random rotation and all of the good stuff. So now what you can do is you can add a couple more bananas. So let's go back to our scene here. Let's actually duplicate this banana here so that we have multiple bananas in our game view. Well, they're not all visible, so let's move them a little further to the right, like so, like this. Well, still not perfectly visible, but that's fine. And now let's make them explode. And you can see that they are exploding in different directions or flying in towards different directions with different rotations and all of the good stuff. And now in case you don't want your bananas to also fly towards the front or the back, so only fly towards the left and right, what you can do is you can limit inside of the rigid body your position, so freeze position in the Z coordinate for the left banana part and the right banana part. And if you run the game then again, you will see that the bananas will simply fly on the, well, towards the left and right and not so much towards the front and back. All right, that's it for this video. See you in the next one.